Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to this sixth and final day of our 6-day conference on the UP General Education Program. The conference was organized for us to collectively reflect on teaching GE in a time of crisis, re-articulate the relevance of the GE philosophy, and reinvigorate the teaching and learning of GE. In the first 5 days of the conference, we have engaged in conversations around each of the common GE courses taught across the UP system, either as core or elective GE courses, as well as the GE courses that are unique to one or two campuses, and which other campuses might consider for inclusion in their own menu of GE courses. Our panelists have led discussions on the relevance of GE, both its enduring relevance as well as its particular relevance to the times we are living in. I think there is unanimity about the resonance of GE in our everyday lives, especially in this time of pandemic. Among others, we have reflected on the necessity of, for example, locating art in everyday contexts, ethics and ethical dilemmas in crisis situations, both big and small, our participation in the making and writing of history, communication as a discourse, mathematics in and for human flourishing, the construction of identity in scarcity and struggle, and many more. We have also discussed at great length the challenges of teaching GE remotely, which are in fact also the challenges of teaching any and all courses remotely. The discussion has revealed a great insight around the best blend of synchronous and asynchronous classes. Expectedly, our preferences and positions differ, with some of us opting for entirely asynchronous classes and others trying for twice weekly synchronous meetings. The related or underpinning concern is how to communicate with, motivate, and engage our students, despite the physical separation between us and the failures of technology. Again, we have shared different ways of coping, different strategies. While these are varied or diverse, all are underpinned by the desire to bridge what Moore refers to as transactional distance. Moore's theory of transactional distance, which is widely considered to be one of the seminal theories in distance education, posits that the separation of teacher and learner gives rise to a transactional distance, which is a, quote, psychological and communications space to be crossed, a space of potential misunderstanding between the inputs of instructor and those of the learner. Now, it is important to understand that transactional distance is not unique to distance education or teaching and learning remotely. It exists even when we share the same physical space. The best example, of course, is the transactional distance, or the chasm, if you like, that separates the terror teacher from his or her students. And it has been argued that, in fact, the transactional distance in a remote teaching and learning situation can sometimes be less or narrower than the transactional distance that can exist between teachers and learners in a hostile physical classroom or physical space. In any case, there are three variables that determine the extent of transactional distance, whether you are together in the classroom or not. And these are the elements of dialogue, structure, and learner autonomy. Dialogue refers to interaction between teachers and learners, which has the effect of reducing transactional distance. We have discussed dialogue a lot in this conference, but we have also considered the importance of structure, which refers to course design elements that determine the responsiveness of an educational program to learners' needs, especially when teachers and learners do not share the same physical space and they cannot take their cue from each other's body language, tone of voice, and more direct forms of communication. So structure, for example, has been discussed in the form of the course pack, okay, which I am happy to note many of us consider to be an essential element of effective teaching and learning, especially now. Now, the mix of dialogue and structure impacts on learner autonomy, which refers to the learner's ability to control and manage their own learning. After more than a year of having to teach and learn remotely, I think we can all now agree on how crucial learner autonomy is. Indeed, while we have reflected on the challenges of remote teaching and learning, we have also acknowledged the opportunities or the affordances that it has brought. Most importantly, I think we have come to realize the valuable opportunity to critically reflect on what we teach, how we teach, and why we teach. We have, I think, thought carefully about what is essential, what is the minimum, what is the most critical that we would like our students to learn at this time, no? And we have tried to think through how to go about ensuring that they learn it. Okay, in a way, this is truly what outcomes-based education is. I know that term is reviled amongst us, but in fact, that is what has happened, right? We have had to think long and hard about what our desired outcomes are and how to try and make them happen. And we have also thought deeply, I think, about the role of learners in the learning process. We have agonized about how to teach, but ultimately, I hope that this has led us to thinking about the place of learners, no, in what we are doing. That in the learning process, it cannot be all about teaching or the teacher, that students need to take an active role in their own learning. And we as teachers need to develop both the skills for learning how to learn, as well as the passion for learning. And so I think we have arrived at a reaffirmation of how crucial, how key GE is to the development of these critical, these very essential capacities for human flourishing. In fact, the aims of the GE program, if you recall, are to develop not only breadth of knowledge and understanding and appreciation of the disciplines, but also critical and creative thinking skills, no? Scholarship and passion for learning. And of course, values such as nationalism and a sense of social justice and independence, no? And ability to learn on our own. And so today we are capping our GE conversations with two more conversations. This time on the philosophy of GE, and the interdisciplinarity that necessarily underpins the GE program. And this afternoon, the second session on the continuing evaluation of the GE program and its place in the UP undergraduate curriculum. So let me welcome you once again to this final two conversations. And I turn you over to Vice President for Academic Affairs, Maria Cynthia Rose Banzon Bautista, who will be moderating this very important conversation on the GE philosophy. Ma'am?
Thank you very much, Dean Pat, for your succinct and insightful recap of the conversations that transpired in this year's virtual and protracted system conference. Good morning, everyone. It is my privilege to moderate this morning's plenary, where four of our esteemed colleagues who possess the GE quality of mind and spirit will be sharing their thoughts. This session is divided into two parts. For the next 20 minutes, we shall be listening to the initial reflections of our plenary panel and then proceed to a freewheeling sharing of additional reflections triggered, provoked, or stimulated either by each other's presentations or by the talking points the organizers asked them to reflect upon. That is, the continuing relevance of GE, specifically the GE philosophy for the disciplines in this time of pandemic and in the next normal, and what GE interdisciplinarity means. While our four panelists do not need introduction, let me briefly introduce them in the order of their very, very short presentations. Professor Emeritus Jose Dalisay, or Butch to most of us, graduated from the University of the Philippines in 1984 with an AB degree in English, cum laude. He received an MFA from the University of Michigan in 1988 and a PhD in English from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee on a Fulbright Hays grant. Aside from being a professor in the university, he also served as the director of the UP Institute of Creative Writing and as the vice president for public affairs of the UP system from 2003 to 2005 and from 2017 until his retirement in 2019. He is currently serving as a member of the UP System GE Council together with University Professor Emeritus Jimmy Abad. He has published more than 25 books of fiction and nonfiction, plus numerous plays, screenplays, poems, and essays. His second novel, Soledad's Sister, was shortlisted for the inaugural Man Asian Literary Award Prize. Professor Dalisay has won 16 Don Carlos Palanca Memorial Awards for Literature. His books have been published in the US, Italy, France, and Spain. He has also won 16 Palanca Awards in short story in English, novel in English, full-length play in Filipino, essay in English, poetry in English, one-act play, which all contributed to his elevation to the Palanca Hall of Fame in 2000. He garnered 5 Cultural Center of the Philippines Awards for playwriting and FAMAS, Urian, Star, and Catholic Film Awards and citations for his screenplays. In 2005, he was awarded the Premio Salvara di Roma in Italy for his literary achievements. Professionally, Professor Dalisay has worked with the United Nations Development Program, the Ayala Corporation, the World Bank, the Asia Development Bank, USAID, and the Cultural Center of the Philippines, among many others. Professor Emeritus Michael Tan, Mike to most of us, a medical anthropologist, veterinarian, and writer, earned his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from the University of the Philippines in 1977. He received a Master of Arts in Anthropology from the Texas A&M University in 1982 and a doctoral degree in anthropology from the University of Amsterdam in 1996. He served as the chair of the anthropology department from 2001 to 2010 before becoming dean of the UP Diliman College of Social Sciences and Philosophy from 2010 to 2014. From 2014 to 2020, he served as the chancellor of the University of the Philippines in Diliman. Professor Tan has published extensively, including several books and articles in scholarly journals. He's also known for his work among non-government organizations and for his column Pinoy Kasi, which is published twice a week in the Philippine Daily Inquirer. He received awards and recognitions for his works and contributions. Among the awards he received are the Catholic Mass Media Award in 2007 and 2009, Gawad Pambansang Alagad ni Balagtas, an award for Best Writing in English from Union ng mga Manunulat sa Pilipinas or Union of Writers in the Philippines in 2006, Takashi Fujii Award for Originality in Social Science Research presented by the International Federation of Social Science Organizations in 1997, and International Publication Awards from the University of the Philippines. In 2012, Professor Emeritus Tan was appointed as academician and a member of the National Academy of Science and Technology. which is, of course, we know, the highest advisory body to the government on science and technology. In 1985, he established Health Action Information Network, or HAIN, an NGO involved in health research, public education, and advocacy, which he headed until 2000. Our third panelist, Professor Fidel Nimenzo, is the current Chancellor of the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and a Professor of Mathematics at the College of Science. Prior to being Chancellor, he served as Vice Chancellor for Research and Development under the administration of Professor Emeritus Mike Tan. From 2017 to the present, he serves as convener for the Data Science for Public Policy program of the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies. He obtained a Master of Science degree in 1992 and Doctor of Science degree in 1998, both from Sophia University in Tokyo, Japan. His research areas are number theory, elliptical curves, and coding theory. Among the awards he has received are the Achievement Award in Mathematics from the National Research Council of the Philippines in 2013, the UP Diliman Gawad Chancellor para sa Pinakamahusay na Guro in 2005, and the one UP Professorial Chair Awards and International Publication Awards from UP. He was president of both the Southeast Asian Mathematical Society from 2010 to 2012 and the Mathematical Society of the Philippines from 2004 to 2010, and has held research and teaching posts in Singapore, Tokyo, Amsterdam, Munich, and Phnom Penh. In 2019, he was elected to the governing board of the NRCP and currently chairs its mathematics division. Last but certainly not least, University Professor Emeritus Jimmy Abad, Jamino Abad, or Jimmy to us, a poet and a literary critic, earned his Bachelor of Arts in English magna cum laude from the University of the Philippines in 1964 and Doctor of Philosophy in English Literature from the University of Chicago in 1970 under a Rockefeller Fellowship grant. In 1993, he was appointed University Professor in Literature, the highest academic rank at the University of the Philippines. He served the university in various capacities as Secretary of UP and the Board of Regents from 1977 to 1982, as VP for Academic Affairs from 1987 to 1990, as Director of Likhaan, the UP Creative Writing Center from 1995 to 1998, and currently as a member of the UPGE System Council. Professor Abad is a member of the UP Writers Club and founding member of the Philippine Literary Arts Council, which has put out the Karakoa since 1982, which is a poetry journal in English. In 2009, he became the first Filipino to receive the coveted Premio Ferronia in Rome, Italy, under the Foreign Author category. He was the first holder of the Carlos P. Romulo Professorial Chair in Literature from 1982 to 1983, and received the UP Outstanding Faculty Award for 1985-1986. He was also holder of the Irwin Chair for Literature at the Ateneo de Manila University in 1993. He received the Chancellor's Award as Best Office Administrator in 1998 for his management of the UP Creative Writing Center as its director. He was a fellow at the Cambridge Seminar, Trinity College, University of Cambridge in 1988, a fellow in the International Writers Program of the University of Iowa in 1990, a visiting professor at the Center for Philippine Studies of University of Hawaii at Manoa in 1991, a fellow at the Oxford Conference on Teaching Literature Overseas, Corpus Christi College, 1995, exchange professor in literature at St. Norbert's College in Wisconsin and at Singapore Management University in 2003, represented the Philippines in the Third Mediterranean International Festival of Literature and the Arts in Rome in July 2006. What I read to you is not even adequate to actually describe the achievements of the panelists that we have this morning. So we begin with a sharing of Professor Emeritus Butch Dalisay.
Good morning. There are many discussions of the learning outcomes we expect to produce in general education, and typically the experts in this field, a category to which I surely don't belong, will say that they include intellectual and practical skills, civic and global leadership, knowledge of human cultures, and understanding the physical and natural world. As one university puts it, GE is meant to develop informed people who have the ability to act thoughtfully in society, to make critical judgments, and to enjoy a life dedicated to learning and the pleasures of intellectual and artistic pursuits. Now, we can all make similar formulations, and they will probably be all correct and useful. This morning, however, not being an educational theorist, I'd like to talk about some practical expectations or realizations that I would like my students to come out of GE with. Now, I don't know how these can be formally integrated into syllabi, and maybe they shouldn't be. Rather, they are overarching notions, a kind of wish list of what I, as a teacher, wish my students learn from my classes. I'm phrasing these 12 statements as simply as possible without too many elaborations because I don't want this to sound like an article. Rather, think of these statements as provocations that you and your students can wrangle with. At the end of this very short talk, the workshop organizers can upload this in the chat as a file. So here we go. Number 1, you don't have to understand everything right away. In any case, you can't. Some things in life will forever remain mysteries. Some of them wonderful, some of them perplexing. Staying curious is what matters to the lifelong learner. Number 2, engagement helps. And by engagement, I mean investing yourself, putting in your time, effort, and maybe even your own money behind some belief or idea or activity that means something to you. Sometimes engagement is the best way of knowing, learning, and finally understanding. Number 3, not everything has to have practical value, at least not yet or maybe ever. Value can mean more than utility or money. Delight and discovery are their own rewards. Number 4, you are not the center of the universe. Not everything has to do with you. However, every connection you can make to the world around you leaves a mark that you were here and that in your own way you mattered. Number 5, learn to see time in years and centuries, not seconds or hours. If you want to foretell the future, look back to the past. We may seem to be headed for the future, but in fact, we will all inevitably part of the past. Now, how will you want to be remembered? Number 6, intelligence, cleverness, knowledge, and wisdom are very different things. Knowledge without values is worthless and even dangerous. The middling student who has a sense of good and bad and right and wrong is worthier than the summa cum laude who doesn't. Number 7, the first thought that comes to your mind may not be the best one. Pause and think before you speak or write, especially in these days of Facebook and Twitter. Speech, but also silence, can require courage and good judgment. Number 8, learn to love something larger than yourself, your family, and your prized possessions. Nation, freedom, justice, and equality are very attractive ideas, but you have to learn to bring these big words down to earth in concrete forms, actions, and decisions. Can you accept that you are your housekeeper's equal as a human being? Number 9, be prepared to take risks and to make mistakes, and even to fail. You can learn more from failure than from overperformance. Everybody, even the very best of us, will fail sometime, and it will be good to believe that we are all entitled to at least one big mistake in our lives. Number 10, be prepared to change your mind. As you grow and learn, some things will become more simple and others more complex. You are not a fixed entity. You are changing all the time, and you can change faster than the world around you. Number 11, technology can be deceptive. It can lead us to believe that the world is changing very fast and for the better. Now, that may be true for some of us and for the way we live, but for many others left behind, the world is no better than it was 100 years ago. And finally, number 12, competition is good, but cooperation is often better and necessary. Poems are written by solitary genius, but bridges, cathedrals, and nations are built by many minds and hands. The best way to deal with loneliness is to find something in the many, to learn from and to contribute to the experience of others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Emeritus Butch, for the insights for life. So we now move to Professor Emeritus Mike Tan. Mike, are you here?
Thank you. Thank you, Vice President Finch. Magandang umaga sa lahat. I have a rather long prepared paper, which I have drastically slashed and burned today, but I will send the full text later on. Okay. My two emotional support animals here. Let me start off by saying we live in illiberal times. We live in an age of misinformation and of people choosing to be misinformed rather than to listen to our admittedly fragile sciences still making its way in the dark in search of solutions. We live in illiberal times, our COVID times becoming one long dark night of the generals who call the shots with their war metaphors and war tactics, deploying armored personal carriers, police and camouflage uniforms with long arms in the world's longest lockdown that offers our young and the elderly as sacrificial lambs by keeping them sequestered. Never mind the malls, but allow them sunlight, exercise, fresh air, and the blue skies. We live in illiberal times, most importantly, in the sense that we have allowed ourselves to be overcome by irrational fear, willing to sacrifice our freedoms, forgetting that we have learned from our general education, a term I feel should be phased out and more clearly stated in favor of the term liberal arts, to be taught and learned with pride. Liberal arts, we must remind ourselves, from the Latin ars liberalis, the skills needed for the free. And let's not call them Western, because we find the liberal arts in both the West and in the East, changing with the times. The liberal arts were fertile grounds for humanist thinking to take shape and find their way into the realm of politics, the rise of the republics, the notions of individuals with rights, and of free men, first the white propertied male landowners, but which have since been expanded with varying degrees of progress into our 21st century. COVID has exposed all the fault lines of our times, but our illiberal times often make us censor ourselves, making us fearful of talking about the inequities that have allowed the virus to race through poor communities and countries, about the almost non-existent public healthcare system, which would have increased our chances of survival here in the Philippines, which masked also and often masked our neglect of our educational system and the liberal arts. We must remind ourselves that the liberal arts have always been part of our educational systems. Even during the Spanish colonial period, the liberal arts thrived. And while its reach was small, it did make a difference, most importantly, inspiring the imagination of reformers and revolutionaries. When the Americans aborted Asia's first republic, they built on the existing liberal arts education, but gave it an American cachet. Let's transport ourselves back in time to May 1913 and imagine an excited barcada of young high school graduates preparing to take the admission exams for UP, which were scheduled June 16 to 21, 1913. No, they were not going to take one half-day exams. Instead, they had agreed to take the required entrance subjects of English, history, mathematics, Latin, physics, and botany or general biology for a total of 11 units. In addition, they could choose additional electives of 4.5 units. These are just for entrance exams. No? Their choices being colonial history, government, zoology, chemistry, solid geometry, plain trigonometry, French, German, or advanced Latin and Spanish. The breadth of the entrance exams speak of an educational system that most probably had liberal arts. The students had to take those exams. They had to be familiar with Shakespeare, with Cicero and Virgil, with the Spanish classics. No, they did not have to take the exams in Filipino. And so I'm certainly not saying it was a good system, but it was an admirable system. The science entrance requirements included submission of laboratory notebooks used in high school, which would be returned to them after evaluation. Note that for botany, this included an herbarium or a collection of 50 species or more of plants. For zoology, fortunately an elective, they had to collect 200 species of insects and another 100 species belonging to other classes than insects. Aren't you grateful we don't have to submit that now for UPCAT? No. After we regained independence, UP formalized the first GE program under Vidal Tan. He being a mathematician and engineer, was always reminding people that the liberal arts included the natural sciences. Since then, we have revised the GE program 2 more times, the most recent one in 2019. For decades, we had the College of Liberal Arts, later renamed in Diliman to the College of Arts and Sciences, which later became CAL, CSSP, and CS. The core of GA has been diluted through the years, although thankfully we saw also a proliferation of GE course electives, often tied to particular degree programs. More and more, though, we recognize the dangers of the many academic silos that divide even colleges and departments. We speak of multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary approaches. We pride ourselves in the number of GE courses, but I like the term intersectionality, which reminds us that it is not enough to have many GE courses. These GE courses must dialogue with each other. I would like to see more and more of joint offerings, which we are seeing now in several areas like Philippine Studies or the Tri-Campus Professional Degree for Management of Tropical Environments. I should remind the audience that at one time, the Intermed program in the College of Medicine in Manila was actually a medical humanities program. It was unfortunate they took that out. Our COVID times makes it imperative that we examine our own offerings and dialogue with the other disciplines to bring in additional knowledge and skills. I'm worried about the time. I just wanted to give us an example here. I've actually returned to VetMed. I agreed to help to teach 1 GE course there in veterinary medicine around animal welfare. And it was there where I was able to bring in anthrozoology, which explores the relationships between humans and non-human animals, which startled the students and fellow faculty. I was able to talk about One Health approach, which is so important in COVID, that the environment, that the health of animals and the health of humans come together. We had 140 students in 2 sections, an ordeal when it came to reading through essays, but a joy as well when I realized that they were realizing the importance of GE courses. Their research was impeccable, which shows us that GE courses or liberal arts courses will allow our young to tap into the internet rather than the internet tapping into them. Evocative and provocative. That's what the liberal arts should be. And I was able to smuggle the political even into this VetMed course, pointing out how non-human animals insinuate themselves all the times into arts and humanities. For example, I had them read Alan Jimenez's subversive poem, When the Zoo Took Part in the Elections. The liberal arts are feared precisely because they're subversive. They question convention. We have seen this during the lockdown with the red baiting against UP and a number of other schools. And this is where I return to my point about living in an extraordinarily illiberal time, a fear of freedom and of alternative views. Universities must have that diversity and dialogue and intersections. When I entered UP in 1971, I had already finished 2 years in Jesuit universities, but I marveled at UP where the liberal arts was pervasive in classrooms and outside, in all our institutions, among our faculty, and often we forget the reps, our researchers, extension professionals, and professional staff. I appreciated our main library, which carried the best of the Philippines and of the world. Only recently did I learn that the library was the result of the efforts of Gabriel Bernardo, who was the university librarian from 1924 to 1957. I don't know how anyone can serve that long as an administrator, but he did that. And he had the breadth of knowledge. He studied English and bibliography. We actually had a master's program in UP around that. Interestingly enough, it was also in that History of UP, Volume 2, about to come out soon, where I read about the involvement of students, faculty, and staff in the resistance against the Japanese, many sacrificing their lives. This, I felt, was the product too of the liberal arts: to love freedom, to die for freedom. Among members of the underground was that librarian, chief librarian, Gabriel Bernardo, who kept to this work at the library, but provided liaison with the underground to provide spaces, safe refuge for the underground. And here's the big, and what's so important here, Bernardo, I learned, and it's in the book, was a member of the Communist Party of the Philippines, working closely with Celia Mariano Pomeroy, a leading official in the CPP. Would Bernardo have survived, I thought, in our illiberal times? I doubt it. He was more fortunate to be around in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. There's much that we need to think of at the time when we come back to face-to-face classes and meetings. We must rethink the liberal arts, resume our work around the creation of minors and dual degrees to better prepare our graduates for the world out there, including practical considerations around employment. Meantime, much can be done in our online classes with our liberal arts programs in these COVID times. New skills to be more discerning with social media, for example, to improve their health and science literacy. My dentist, whose daughter enters college this coming school year, frets about these lost years, lost in terms of socialization. And I thought, as she drilled through my tooth, of learning, of teaching our young to read people's emotions through the mask. I dream too of their catching up with physical education, which should be part of our liberal arts if we are concerned with body and mind. We should invoke what we learned ourselves in our liberal arts training. We must help students through times that have seen too much of unresolved anger, despair, and grief. And again, let's rediscover with our students the liberal arts as a wellspring of solace. Get them to read, we must remind them, and not to read just web pages. The humanities and the arts of the world and of our country offer much to be joyful for, as well as hard-nosed wisdom. Let them read and reread Camus' The Plague. Read Homer's Odyssey, The Return After War. Read Rizal. He has a particularly good article, The Treatment of the Bewitched. We are, after all, a nation that is bewitched. Realize too that we need to address the fears, especially of freedom. The liberal arts again must come in, intertwined, offering us strength for our times. Tell our stories and our counter narratives of this quintessential, which is more than lapu-lapu. There are so many other issues that need to be discussed about heroes and anti-heroes. This year, too, is the 20th anniversary of 9/11, which was one of the early excuses to plunge the world into illiberalism. And in December, we marked the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, a time to speak of peace and the specter of new imperialist wars. Realize, too, that we need to address the fears, especially of freedom. The liberal arts, again, must be intertwined to offer strength for our times. It is not enough to provide comfort. We must empower, we must encourage. Tell our stories. Tell it to the nation, tell it to the world. Maraming salamat.
So thank you, Mike, for walking us through the history of the GE program, underscoring intersectionality, liberal arts as a better nomenclature for GE, radical implications of liberal education, and the liberal context, highlighting the liberal context we are living in today. So we now move to Chancellor Fidel.
Good morning. Maayong buntag sa tanan. I've had the pleasure recently to listen to the online GE conversations on innovations and adjustments that many of us have had to make in teaching our courses during the pandemic. We continue to learn from each other's teaching practices amid these difficult times. Ultimately, as we think about what could benefit our students, but also how we ourselves could adapt and find ways to improve as teachers in the remote learning environment. From the discussions, we see how UP education is a combination of training in the disciplines with liberal education, as embodied in our GE program, which is holistic and integrative in orientation. As our students pursue their disciplinary expertise, specializing in their major subjects and electives, the UPGE program provides them with a larger view, allowing them to see the connections between disciplines, as well as with the rest of the world in all its complexities. An important goal, of course, is to develop in our students the capacity for critical thinking, which is a habit of mind, with which we question assumptions, we see connections, we understand context, we look at different perspectives, we read between the lines, we think out of the box, and always consider the consequences of our thoughts and actions. The critical, agile mind is among many other vital tools that will help enable our students to, as our GE program mandates, effectively address increasingly complex issues and challenges of this century. I like how the Harvard GE Task Force puts it. The aim of a liberal education is to unsettle presumptions, defamiliarize the familiar, to reveal what is going on beneath and behind appearances, to disorient young people, and to help them find ways to reorient themselves. I joined this conversation today in order to address why GE is important in my own discipline, in the sciences. First of all, we need to dispel the myth that science is neutral. In fact, science and mathematics are adventures of the mind with real consequences. Science is vital across disciplines, not just a collection of facts, but rather at its core, it is a way of thinking, a way of dealing with the world. Science, through technology, bears an impact on society, particularly culture, values, and social institutions. But these too, in turn, shape the development of science. Science has context and is shaped by it, historical, cultural, political, social, and ethical. Our students need to be equipped with an understanding of science, its powers, as well as its dangers when left unchecked. There are a few occasions that come to mind when I think about the possibilities of interdisciplinarity for the sciences. One forum was what we had in the College of Science 12 years ago when we commemorated the 150th year of publication of Charles Darwin's The Origin of the Species. This was a cross-disciplinary symposium where we examined Darwin's ideas, how Darwin's ideas have shaped thinking within and beyond biology, including the controversies that these ideas have provoked, which in turn have enriched discourse within and across disciplines. Our panelists came from diverse fields: Perry Ong from biology, Michael Tan from anthropology, Madis Jokna from history, Raul Fabella from the School of Economics. In 2018, in November, we commemorated the bicentennial anniversary of Mary Shelley's novel, Frankenstein, through a symposium on literature, science, and ethics. This symposium was an occasion, of course, for interdisciplinarity. Mary Shelley's 19th century pioneering sci-fi novel, which gave us one of the most iconic monsters in literature and film, anticipated 21st century issues, the body and human consciousness, biotechnology and human responsibility, robotics, artificial intelligence, and the perils of science ungoverned by ethical norms. These events and others like it allow us to share and debate ideas across different colleges, and are reminders that we belong to a community of scholars. We may come from different disciplines, but this community brings us together to enable us to explore the many ways in which our disciplines connect and interact. The GE program has become all the more important in the context of the pandemic. Within this environment of interdisciplinarity, we must also bear in mind how we as educators can encourage our students to develop the ideals of humanism and, of course, nationalism. Not only do we find ourselves in a rapidly changing world in the midst of emerging technologies, but our national and global situation requires us to take creative and constructive action that will contribute to the improvement of community, the nation, and the world. We must foster an environment that provokes questions at the same time as they move our students to concrete action, especially amid the many injustices that still plague our society. But this can only happen if we consistently find ways to connect and interact, reaching out beyond our disciplines, not only during these trying times of the pandemic, but even beyond the remote learning environment. There's definitely a combined effort across disciplines to ensure that our GE program continues to provide students with the necessary tools for the future so that they can offer viable solutions to our problems and help us bring closer to that still elusive and complicated path to the next normal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chancellor Fidel, for underscoring the idea of science and math as adventures of the mind, providing concrete examples of interdisciplinary activities in the past, and calling us to come together again in order not just, I guess, for discussions, but also for our collective engagement. We now move, last but not least, to University Professor Emeritus Jimmy Abad.
Oops.
Jimmy, you're mute. Muted. Oh, sorry. So you're mute. I guess you have to press the microphone on the left side. So sorry, Jimmy, we cannot hear you. So there's a mic. There you okay. Great.
Like so low tech. Yeah. Well, anyway, when one speaks or writes, it is good to know, to reflect where one is coming from. One always comes from his own sense or consciousness of what is real. One always comes from his own sense or consciousness of what is real or true, what is right or wrong. And he then translates that consciousness into language. Language is his only means or medium. Now, to translate is to carry or ferry across a void or emptiness. For example, the space between languages, that's a void. One, to translate is to carry or ferry across a void or emptiness one's own sense or consciousness, one's own thoughts or feelings toward significance or meaningfulness. With words and words, you shape, you give a form or structure. You forge an apprehensible form to be understood so that your consciousness takes on a form, an apprehensible form. So, when you speak, you're already translating your own thoughts and feelings into words. I want to say something more about language because when you speak of interdisciplinarity, all you have in mind is that every intellectual pursuit in the natural or social sciences or in the humanities, every intellectual pursuit needs a language. And every intellectual field has its own language, of course. Yeah. So, what is language? Language is an invention of the human imagination, and it embodies a human consciousness of a human reality. Actually, the only reality we shall ever know is only a human reality. Animals have a different consciousness of their reality, and they also have their own language. So, if language is an invention of the human imagination, language and imagination are one. To think well is to imagine well. The word evokes an image, and the image lights up its meaning. To think well is to imagine well. To recall anything, to have any memory at all, is to imagine something well. So memory is imagination's heartland. The human being, any language in whatever form, any language in whatever form. For example, in South America, the people can communicate with each other from long distances by whistling. Whistling is a form of language. Can you imagine that? Unless you are one of them, you will never understand what they're whistling about. So, so uh, the human being, uh, the human being is his consciousness, his language, and the human being evolves, even as his language evolves through time, because his consciousness, the consciousness of any community evolves, changes, and that consciousness embodies the community's culture, their way of thinking and feeling about their reality. That's consciousness. That is sense or consciousness. So we all we all uh, we're all evolving. Perhaps perhaps humanity is evolving like all our languages is evolving. Humanity is evolving toward a kind of universal consciousness, or you might say a universal human community or communion. In other words, the languages intercommunicate, as in translation from one language to another. And so we, we, we begin to understand each other, different cultures, we begin to understand each other that way. So, and by the way, I play on the word to understand. To understand something is to stand under. What do you mean to stand under? When you understand something, you are standing under a cloud of unknowing. Because all reality is essentially mystery. You know, I look up that word mystery. It comes from the Greek word mystes, meaning to say initiate. So once one is born, one begins to be an initiate into mystery. All reality is mystery. You know, in science, in science you have what they call chaos theory. Yeah, you have that in science, chaos theory. And it means that all things somehow interrelate. No? Somehow. One, a butterfly's the a butterfly's wing fluttering in South America causes a storm in the Philippines. Well, how? Well, all things somehow interconnected to produce that storm in the Philippines. There's science theory, even in science. But science is only a way of looking also. Our science is our own consciousness of our own human reality. Yeah. So that's why when I hope I'm making sense. All we have really is language. Every discipline has its own language. Yeah. And every language is that discipline's consciousness of what is real and what is true. No, everything is human. Yeah, everything is human. But wow, nothing is more wonderful than humanity. Yeah. Yeah, that's all I have to say. I'm sorry if I hope I made some sense. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, University Professor Jimmy. Of course, you made sense. And thank you for unpacking the taken for granted assumptions about everyday acts like writing, linking them to consciousness, language, imagination. And there are many implications for interdisciplinarity from what you said. So thank you. So now thank you to all our members of our panel. I suppose our faculty and colleagues here and our audience actually is maybe overwhelmed by a lot of insights that came from them. So we now have about 10 minutes for a conversation among our panelists in terms of if there are additional insights that you would like to share that you were not able to share because of the very limited time. So maybe this is the time to actually share them. Is there anything else you would like to add to what you said? Okay, Butch, you're smiling.
I think I've already said a lot. I'll leave the floor open to questions.
Okay. So you'd rather have questions now rather than us conversing at this point?
Oh.
We have about 10 to 15 minutes. If you have reactions to each other's or you were provoked by each other's presentation and you would like to share a bit more, please feel free to do so. You can also feel free to discuss, because one of the nagging questions here is exactly what's the relevance of GE to this time of pandemic. I mean, so those questions.
Well, I think the one good thing about this pandemic is that it really provoked us into thinking a lot more about the science of life and why it's important, above superstition and opinion and so on. It brings us back to the basics of why is this happening to us, and also to what we can do about it in a scientific way, and figuring out the appropriate response beyond just preconceptions and politics. Ano ba talaga dapat mangyari dito? And I think the kind of of general education that we try to pursue in the UP helps in that kind of rational thinking na kulang sa panahong ito because of a highly politicized atmosphere and also of a tendency to return to superstition and that kind of thinking.
Yes, Jimmy. Sorry. No, sorry. Okay. Fidel, Jimmy muna, but except that
yes.
he's talking. Jimmy, can you unmute? Again, touch the red red microphone. Okay, go.
Nakamute pa rin.
You touched it again. Okay, unmute. Okay.
This is Jimmy's.
Boss, I'd like to add something. The pandemic, yung mga lockdown times, that's very good because it forces one, very good in one sense, it forces one to reflect. And what do you mean by to reflect? when you reflect, you look into you look into yourself. Yeah, you look into yourself, and you know what happens there. You listen to yourself. You listen. You find you discover what your consciousness or sense, yeah, what your consciousness or sense is of what is real, what is true, what is right, what is wrong. That is to reflect. uh, in other words, you're talking. You know what? If you look up the word psyche, the word psyche is Greek. It's spelled the same way using the English alphabet, although it sounds different. If you, it would sound psyche, but that's psyche, no? And psyche, you know what it means. If you look up the meaning of the word psyche, it is the mind, it is consciousness, it is breath, it is the principle of life, it is life, it is soul, it is the spirit, it is the self. Yeah. So during this pandemic, when you reflect, you are going to meet yourself, your consciousness when you reflect. Oh boy, yeah, yeah, that's one value when you are all by yourself. Yeah, and I'm all by myself. So what do? I just write. That's all I can do. It's all I know. Right. Right. Even if it is comical, you're right. That's your consciousness. Give it body. Give your consciousness body. And you give it body with language, with words. Yeah. But of course, when you write, it's a contest with words because the words pop up in your mind. You have to choose. So it's a struggle also with words. Ah, no. Writing is also a struggle with words. You want to give a definite shape to your consciousness of what is right, of what is true, of what is real. Yeah, that's what it is. Reflect. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks,
I'm,
Jimmy,
I'm,
Fidel,
I'm
and then we
done.
will have
I'm done.
Mike.
Yeah. Yeah.
What the pandemic has caused us is really disruption. The pandemic has caused disruption. It has pushed us out of our comfort zones. It has pushed us into the unfamiliar. I mean, in the situation, there are no templates. No? The old ways of doing things do not work. And so what is needed right now is a critical, creative mind that can think out of the box, no? That has the courage to think of solutions for unfamiliar situations. And this is precisely what the GE program does. No? Uh, uh, what we want are critical, agile minds. And it's agility of the mind that is important at the time like this. No? This the new normal. No?
Yeah.
The pandemic has also challenged us to think of solutions because it has worsened problems in society. It has worsened poverty. It has worsened unemployment, etc. There's a lot of new problems in new dimensions of problems that have emerged, and these are the challenges that we need to address in our GE courses. It's really venturing out to unfamiliar territory, but precisely it's agility of the mind that's important. This minds that are able to adapt to new situations.
Thank you, Fidel. Mike?
Yeah. I took out one whole. Remember, I said I did slash and burn in for my paper, which was quite long. I took out an entire paragraph about the problems of fake news and misconceptions and all. No? And a real fear that we have right now, because I'm helping out the government as well with this, is the resistance to vaccination will be very high. Okay, and it is not because people can't understand vaccination, but because they do not trust government. And not only that, they don't trust government, but they believe in conspiracy theories. No? I'm hearing a lot of people saying, gawa-gawa lang yan, wala namang totoong COVID. No? I'm hearing people saying, look at what they did with Dengbaksha. No? That Dengbaksha controversy is disastrous for us. We belong. And there are studies that have been done cross-country to show And look at America, right? America, one of the most advanced technological countries in the world. And look at their citizens. Talk about superstitions, 21st century superstitions. No? I named quite a few here, no? Some of our the problems we have. No? You know that we're probably the only country that requires both masks and shields. You do not need to have masks and shields together. No? We're the only country that still insists on keeping minors inside the houses. I'm all in favor of they're not going to malls because it saves me money. Plus, I think malls, they will catch the infection there. But we must allow the young to go out and the elderly. No? Ako takas ng takas. but I know a lot of elderly who have not been able to have their rehab. They've not been able to have their exercises and all. It's very misguided. No? And they are not listening because the generals do not listen to our doctors. Our doctors are so tired. They're fatigued, no, from all this. But they continue to speak up, no, in their own way. And I think GE has a role to play. We have to build our science. And, you know, one of the things I feel too is we still think of GE as mainly social sciences, arts, and humanities. And I'm challenging the College of Science. I would have wanted to see more GE courses from science, College of Science, especially math, you know, to understand what's going on there. Remember the plateauing and all that, and also so that we can have better epidemiologists later on. They have been not using the correct indicators either. My friends abroad are saying they're doing it all wrong, and then our response always to declare a lockdown, right? Pag tumaas, lockdown ka agad. And they never tell people when they will end the lockdown. They should give us encourage people to say, sige, kung bumaba sa level na ito, we can bring back that. Instead, we have GCQ, MCQ, whatever. One of my doctor friends said na yung ECQ will mean eternal community quarantine. It will never go away. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mike. So I pass this on. It's 10:09. We're 4 minutes late.
Mm-mm.
I pass it on to Vanji, who's going to moderate the question and answer session. Vanj?
Yes, ma'am. Hello po. Good morning. Check ko lang po kung naririnig yung audio. Okay ba yung audio? Okay, thank you. So actually, we have questions that we've received from the registration, and some of those questions actually nadaanan na po ng ating panelists. But just to acknowledge, and then maybe if the panelists would like to add some more. So like may question dito on the relevance of GE, no? So like why do we have to even ask what GE is and what makes it important at this point? Sir Jimmy was saying kanina na yun, we reflect, diba? And then we listen to ourselves. And sabi ni Sir Fidel, we have to have the critical, creative, agile mind to think of solutions. So I think itong questions on what is the compelling significance of GE in this pandemic, ano ang kabuluhan at papel ng GE philosophy sa panahon ng pandemya, diktadura at kawalang pagpapahalaga sa soberanya, and yung how does GE confront and address the pandemic and its related issues were responded to by our panelists. So I'd just like to ask if the panelists would like to add some more to that. Sir Butch, okay na?
Well, from what you just read out, I think it's very clear that the general education is the kind of armamentarium that we need to confront all of these issues facing us today, from the medical to the political to the legal to the technical, and of course to the social and even the philosophical. And again, to return to the pandemic has so many characteristics and aspects that you really need all of these kinds of disciplines to bear down on this problem, which is clearly not just a medical one that can be solved by a drug. And this has revealed all the other problems and infirmities in our systems. Kaya even our imaginations have been affected by this. Kaya maganda yung mga estudyante natin ay have many windows from which to look at this situation from many angles.
Thank you, Sir Butch. Yes, Sir Jimmy, go ahead po.
Here again, my
Sir, you're on mute.
I already
So, i-permanently unmute mo na kaya, Jim.
Sir, naka-mute po kayo ulit.
unmute.
Yan, sir. Okay na yan. Ay, sir, napindot po ulit.
Oh, yan.
Okay.
Walang gagalawin yan.
Yeah. Yung kaibigan, any course actually can be GE course. The important thing about GE is how to think well. That's the important thing in GE, how to think well. And for me, to think well is to imagine well. The two go together. Why? Because all you have to do with language. Yeah. And language and imagination are one. So to think well is to imagine well. And any GE course teaches you how to think well and imagine well. Any GE course. Yeah. That's what I want to add and emphasize. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you, Sir Jimmy. Salamat, Sir Jimmy, Sir Butch. So if I may go on to the next question. We have a question. Yeah, Sir Fidel, go ahead.
Gusto ko lang sabihin na I also hope that we can develop in our students empathy.
Yeah.
As an important component of GE, lalo pa sa panahon ng pandemya. We are driven by goals, by targets, whether gobyerno natin or even our university. Kasi may academic calendar, etc. But the pandemic really challenges us to think of constraints, the constraints that people experience in every day. And this is there's really a need for empathy at this time, as a guide to making decisions. And I think that we need to teach that through GE. In GE, we don't only teach abstractions, but we need to enable our students to connect to the times, to connect to current constraints. Because only then can we find solutions to the problems we confront in this pandemic.
Plus the aspect of learning to think as a community. That's it.
Yeah.
Especially in UP, we put so much emphasis on individual achievement, but we have to learn to think together to solve common problems, and that's not often emphasized enough. At least where I come from. At alam ko sa sciences, talagang collaborative ang trabaho dyan, pero sa aming mga manulat, kanya-kanya talaga yan eh. Kaya we need to cross that barrier.
Yeah. So siguro, Sir Butch, this is a segue to one of the questions we received from Professor Benny. Parang yung on collaboration and how can we really, how can faculty members from different departments be motivated to really team teach, to collaborate? And then he looks forward to hearing your thoughts on how faculty of all ages and very different departments be motivated to team teach. And maybe our audience can also share their thoughts on this chat box, diba, while we ask also our panelists this question. Who wants to go first? Sir Mike, yes po, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, we need imagination, but I think we need to be more daring. It's daring to look across, to look at the possibilities. I'm actually maybe this is a good time to clarify. No, I am not retired. Okay, I'm still teaching in UP, and I am now handling a college. Mm-mm. I'm handling a college now, very small, very small performing arts college. Okay, all the students are from very poor families. No one pays tuition. Okay, and but when I came in, I said, well, we have to look at their curriculum. I said, these students are going to graduate and they won't be able to find work, right? But the other thing also, I said, we're going to introduce a new program here, which is sports science. And they said, why sports science? I said, because performing arts, and sports science will go well together. I said, easily we are going to have graduates. Lahat ng graduates natin will be artistang atleta at atletang artista. You know, the performing arts students got so excited. They're looking forward to having the athletes come in, and the athletes are a bit nervous because I said, we will offer you ballet lessons. For those who plays basketball, you can choose between ballet and jazz, no? And why not? So we stretch their imagination by stretching our imagination. And I see a lot of potentials in UP Diliman. No? We tried it before, and I know that programs are continuing now. I think definitely we need to get our faculty exposed to the possibilities. Maybe we should have a conference where we talk about these intersectionalities. No? What are the programs where different departments came together? No? Maybe one of the best kept secrets in UP Diliman right now, and which Chancellor Fidel has been supporting, is we actually have a mindfulness program being offered as a PE course. Okay, so they're learning to meditate as a PE course. Again, why not, right? And that helps them with their stress. I think that will be launched by next year on a bigger scale. And over in the school that I teach, we're also offering it. And we have College of Medicine students who are taking it as well, because medicine is so very stressful. No? So it's funny watching the medical students meditate as well. No? And then they rush back to the hospital to work. No? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sir Mike.
Yung,
Sir Fidel, yep. And then Sir Butch.
Benji. Yes. Then yung tanong ni VC Benny kanina, no, how do we team teach? No, I think VC Benny is one of those who can answer that effectively. And I suggest that our faculty watch the tapes of the GE conversations. No? I've been going through them, and I was very interested in the sharing. Yung one example of team teaching is the multidisciplinary course that sila Benny are doing. Ito yung DR maps, no? Where they teach students how to prepare for disaster and disruption. Nakakatuwa kasi yung team nila comes from different disciplines, no? Engineering, psychology, education, art studies, communication. No? And they, in the presentation which I listened to yesterday, describe how they could pull together ideas and perspectives from all these disciplines to talk about disruption and disaster and how we can prepare for it. Anyway, I think AVP Vanji, I think the tapes to the GE conversations are available online.
Yeah, we will share. We were just putting it up together in one page, and this will be made available to everyone. Sir Butch?
Yes, in addition to that, at the Institute of Creative Writing, of which Jimmy and I are members, we also have an interdisciplinary book forum where we choose titles published by the UP Press and then organize a forum around it coming from various disciplines. So for example, it could be a literary work, but you have anthropologists, political scientists, and anthropologists, and even engineers or architects respond to the work, depending on, of course, on what's appropriate. And it's not just literature, of course. Given the output of the UP Press, you can have a work of science, but then have people from the humanities also responding to this. So we need really these kinds of forums to to talk among ourselves. Naalala ko sa panahon ni President Pascual, nagkaroon siya ng yung Knowledge Festival. And we can still hold something like that, probably on a scale down a bit because of the pandemic. Pero importante yung nagkakaalaman tayo what we're doing, and the connections are made in places like that because we find that we have convergent interests.
Okay, thank you, Sir Butch. And I think merong nagsagot dito sa chat that this is an example, no? How we're doing, G class should follow a panel discussion format like similar to this one. So sabi ni Sir Nathaniel, this is a great example for a G class. So we should have more of this. And yes, to the forum that nabanggit ni Sir Butch. And I guess ang isang I don't know, I enjoy yung availability ng recordings, no? So nasabi ni Sir Fidel, no? I'd like to go back to the G conversations kasi we've had like 15 conversations, 11 common G courses, and then the clustered G courses, and really there are some points there, insights that are very good to go back to and reflect on, you know. So yeah, so it's good that we'll have this recording available to everyone. So if I may move on to our next question, this is connected to what Chancey Mike was saying earlier, read. So sabi dito is how do we, sorry nawala, gumalaw yung aking question. Let me just very quickly look for it. How can we engage students to read seminal, classical, technical writings instead of popular social media articles? Because students opt to read or hear commentaries. Ayan. Buntong hininga, lalim nun, sir.
Well,
yeah, Sir Mike, go ahead po.
Well, it's an open secret that all these books, classics or not, are floating around on the internet for free, right? Our students know that. They're so quick to sometimes I'm lecturing on something and then suddenly one of the students has downloaded the book already and is sent out to all of their classmates and, "Huy, may rules ang UP about copyright. Don't do it during class." So maybe what we need to do is which university was it? Probably Butch would know. They had a list of the great classics na, no? And I think they...
Tago yan, di ba? Kay Jimmy.
Or si Jimmy nga, no? The great classics nga. But, and of course, we should not forget, we have to include the Philippine great classics nga, no? And of course, Rizal wrote quite a few. And there will have to be a greater push. You know, when I was researching for this article, I didn't know that the U.S. Armed Forces had a program for pocket books. No,
oh yeah,
they printed all these great novels and for their soldiers. No, and it was like a library system where everyone and the soldiers loved it. They would tear out chapters so that one book would be read by several people. No? And then we know, of course, right after the war, they had the GI Bill, which sent 2 million former soldiers to college. And produce people like Clifford Geertz, one of the greatest anthropologists, no? Who was the guy who wrote Soylent Green. And a lot of the humanities really got a shot in the arm because you had all these soldiers who became writers and researchers and all. And I think it helped to humanize them. But the later generations of soldiers, you know, and of course, they were battle scarred in Vietnam and all. And I think UP Pampanga actually benefited from the GI Bill because the American soldiers in Clark could register in UP and their bills were paid by the US government. So again, the push has to come from our government. No? I wouldn't mind having soldiers studying, going back to school. We might be able to humanize them. Mm-hmm. Although I think there'll be a lot of rallies and protests the soldiers come into. We can say we'll allow the soldiers to come in as students, not as soldiers.
Yes, Chancey White. Thank you. Sir Butch, you want to add to that?
Well, I was just thinking of the earlier question about interdisciplinary or team teaching. And I recalled that a month ago, I had a great time giving a lecture to STS class ni Gani Tapang. And what he asked me to do was not to talk about literature, but the technology of writing. And being a geek and the collector of pens and typewriters and computers, I really had a field day explaining why these things are important and why technology can affect even the way you write and the way you think. And I was hoping na sana marami pang ganong klaseng connections na magagawa tayo dito sa at least sa STS natin.
Thank you, Sir Butch. Sir Fidel?
Yeah. Navanji, I was just thinking about our physical environment, no? Our universities, that not only our classrooms, our buildings, our colleges, but also our campuses, no? Of course, we're proud of our Diliman campus, but I know that other campuses are greener and lusher. I was thinking of activities outside campuses, like outside our classrooms, like bird watching. Because recently my family and I have discovered bird watching makes us think not only about biology, the environment, ecology, but it's an activity that develops keenness of eye and mind. It allows us to understand behaviors like flight, allows us to understand silence, allows us to reflect on the wonders of a different world, the world of birds. Na sinasabi ko sa kasi ang inisip ko yung G education takes place not only in the classroom, but it's the GE mindset allows you to see the world, your campus with a new perspective. Kahapon, my family discovered a bird watching app. Tuwan-tuwa kami about the birds on campus. Doon may write up on birds, their sounds, their behavior, their photos. At parang may crowdsourcing component siya. Anyway, I'm digressing, but I just what I want to say is that G is not only a course, it's a mindset, it's a perspective that you can carry with you as you step out of the classroom and walk in the streets or when you walk on campus, etc. Anyway, ayun lang. I just to share.
Thank you. So sabi nga ni
that
Chancy
mindset,
Mike, bird watching is a PE course then. And then merong dito, suggestion si VC Benny. What if we invert society, technology, and science? And the same way rename other G courses to de-emphasize the disciplinal box and re-emphasize society, humanity, and ecology. Ayan, so merong si VC Ben dyan. And then, okay, because I'm seeing it sa chat, no? So si Ma'am RV Banyes is asking, are we headed for the post-Anthropocene GE framework post-pandemic scenario? Kasi meron din ganyang question tayong natanggap na parang moving forward, are we still going to implement remote learning or go back to face-to-face mode of learning? So would you like to comment on this post-Anthropocene GE framework? Sir Mike, ang sarap ng ngiti niyo, sir.
Siyempre sa just to be sure we're all on the same page, no? Anthropocene kasi is the era where human beings are responsible. Diba they have the Holocene and all these climatic ages, but now we are in the Anthropocene era, and there are actual fears that we will not have that we might have a post-Anthropocene era, in the sense that humanity would have destroyed the planet. And the post-Anthropocene era is one where there will be no human beings left, and which nature will profit from. No? I hope that will not happen. But I think we have to be very realistic now. You know, when I brought my children, when the lockdown was declared last year, the day before, I brought them to Laguna, no, and left them there. May pamilya naman. I said, this will pass. 2 weeks, 1 month, we'll be together again. Who would have known? Who would have known? And articles are starting to come out now. And I think we have to be realistic, prepare our children, our students for this. It's going to be a long haul. The post-pandemic era is not anywhere near In fact, an article came out from New York Times just yesterday. People are now talking about, the scientists are talking about COVID-19 possibly becoming endemic, meaning it will be with us for the very long time. We will be having annual vaccinations for those of us, of course, who have access to healthcare. Kawawa yung mga wala. No? We cannot reach herd immunity. The Philippines is not likely to reach it until late 2022 or even 2023. No? I'm almost afraid to talk about this with my children and with my students, but I think we owe it to them. No? Kasi I thought by August, makaka-face-to-face na tayo. No? I don't think we will be able to have face-to-face classes. No? So it's going to be a long haul. Kawawa ang mga freshmen. We have to try our best to make the best for them. No? I really have no answers on how we can do hand holding for them. No? Kahit graduate students ko, hirap na hirap ako. No? You know, you have students who buong pamilya ang naapekto sa COVID. No? And yet you see also so much courage, so much giving. Maybe we should tell their stories too, how they stay home and take care of their parents, of their grandparents, and of themselves. No? Maybe it's time also for us as faculty to start writing them down. I get my students also to, it's therapeutic for them to write. Maybe we should do more of that.
Okay, thank you, Sir Mike. And then sabi nga ni Ma'am Alisa, not formally established ang Anthropocene, still up in the air. And then just related to the PE course, no? So there's a question here, I guess more addressed more to those offering PE courses. Why isn't there a GE course in PE? So why not, diba? So we can ask our proponents, human kinetics, to consider this. Okay, let me move on to the next question. Ito medyo seryosong question. How do we assert the non-utilitarian thrust of our GE philosophy against the utilitarian bent of outcomes-based education and audit culture? For example, the internal assessment and the external assessment that's going on right now. Anyone? Sir Butch?
Baka si Cinch yung pwedeng sumagot yan.
Ma'am Cinch. Ma'am, nakamute po kayo, ma'am.
I guess in the introduction, when Pat actually talked about, when she consolidated and talked about what was discussed in the conversations, she actually discussed outcomes-based. The problem with outcomes-based, and I'm saying this because I was in CHED at the time, and the advocacy was that I was in CHED precisely for a shift to learning outcomes-based, but we never understood it. Everybody talked about OBDI, so I hate that word. I hate OBE because there are so many thoughts about OBE, big OBE, small OBE. But I guess this morning when Pat recapped the conversation, she also talked about what it means to be genuinely learning outcomes-based. So I guess we just have to understand. I know we have shifted. We have not fully shifted. It's not yet the spirit of the learning outcomes-based. It was just a lot of impositions that you had to put the verbs matter, etc. And then how you say things, which are really not the essence of it. So I guess that's it. Now the system of audit, I guess that's the problem we have, diba? We're in a world where we are expected as a higher education institution to be able to work on our quality. Our problem may be metrics. So this is the whole setup of auditing and looking at ourselves. It's not an external audit. It's how do we improve ourselves? Except that we have an external person. That's why we're saying it's not necessarily accreditation bodies or assessment bodies. That they become practical or they become useful for disciplines that are professional, where you already have some norms, diba? Even if you question the norms. I question, this is very politically incorrect, I don't like the rankings. Methodologically, there are so many problems with rankings, except that we are forced to actually be there. It's the same. I guess it's the same thing with the fact that you need to be looked at by somebody else apart from you, so that you also improve. So the spirit of that is not an external police saying you have to do this and you have to do that. It's you saying this is where we are, somebody feedbacking that maybe this is something you can do. You can actually say no to that because this is where you are. So it's reflection. Going back to Jimmy, it's reflecting on who you are, what you are. That's what the SAR is supposed to be, that report that's supposed to be written. If it is written by the people who actually rethink where their discipline should go. So I think that is also a means of doing what we have to do, diba? Which is break down disciplines if we have to. But yung mga sinasuggest ni VC Benny, they're actually where the world is moving. And maybe later in the synthesis, I'll say a bit more about that. But yun, sorry that OB dies, OBE, verbs, all of those have become the association of learning outcomes based. When earlier, I thought that Pat actually captured it very well. So maybe this is also another conversation we should have. Sorry.
Thank you, Ma'am Sage. Salamat. Mr. Fidel, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, kasi nabanggit ni VP Cinch ang rankings, no. A reality of our world is it's increasingly becoming quantified, no? And this quantification, of course, is driven by scientists and social scientists who believe in the powerful tool of quantification. No? But this is a GE topic, no? Because if you really look at quantification, we're pursuing measurable goals, targets. No, but there's a saying in economics, no, a measure that becomes a target ceases to become a good measure. And we need to reflect on the how to balance quantification with other dimensions. We are ranking universities, we are evaluating ourselves during promotion, and we all know that numbers cannot capture, no, the quality of performance. No? Anyway, ang sasabi ko lang, quantification or this reality that we are increasingly ruled by numbers is a GE topic.
How much is your popcorn?
Hello.
Yeah, go
and
ahead.
The discussion of VP Cinch on obidization and rankings really points out to a need for our university to begin a conversation about how metrics rule our lives. There has to be some good balance, no, between measuring ourselves with numbers and understanding basically the context with which we carry on our jobs.
Maybe just one last sentence connected to what Fidel is saying. I just shared with Vanji and with Alisa this whole conversation that they're having in Malaysia among educationists, people in quality assurance. And the comment was, people are already gaming because we have the metrics and people have learned how to game the metrics. So it is really not, it's publications, but it is not really very much the game of citations and publications. But the point they're making is, and my comment there is, we have to have communities of scholars that actually look at each other's work and critique each other. That's the culture. That's the real culture of the critique, diba? It can have a quality piece that did not go into a journal that has high impact, but has high quality, except that it did not go there. But we don't have that yet. We're not in our departments. So anyway, yeah, sorry.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to invite everyone also to look in dun sa mga inputs sa chat, no? So we have reflections coming in here also. Thank you very much to our participants for engaging. So one question here, which I guess is related to the question of Ma'am Melania Flores dito sa chat, is general education political? And then dito sa dito sa question ni Ma'am Melania first, sa balangkas ng objective at responsive education, sa balangkas ng pilosopiya at layunin ng GE program, ano ang napapanahong pakahulugan sa nasyonalismo ang dapat na nilalaman ng mga kurso sa GE? So, who wants to comment on that? Sir Mike, yes, please.
Unmute si Mike.
Sir Mike, naka-mute po kayo.
Siyempre, yung nationalismo, I think napakahalaga yan, but we also want to make it concrete nga, no? Kaya sabi ko nga kailangan evocative yung how can people relate to it, no? And just a very practical example, no? I'm so horrified during this pandemic nga, alam mo may mga subdivisions na nagbawal ng vegetable gardens and fruits, planting vegetables and fruits kasi daw pangit. Okay? And then they're planting all these imported stuff and ornamentals and all, which tells you how distorted our educational system is. No? To look at vegetables and fruits, ang kulang lang sabihin local vegetables and fruits as pangit. Diba? Na hindi bagay para sa mga subdivisions natin. No? Dagdagan mo pa yan, if you ask young people today, marami sa kanila, hindi sila familiar sa mga prutas natin, sa mga gulay natin. No? So if you're talking about very practical nationalism, just knowing what yan nga, kaya natuwa nga ako dito sa UP in 1913 na nag-require ng herbarium of at least 50 plants. No? Meaning it was taught in high school. I have an assistant in this other school nga. Gulat na gulat siya nung nagdala ako ng tanglad. I said, we need to plant tanglad here in this campus. Sabi niya, ano ba yan? Sabi ko, tanglad. Hindi siya aware kung ano yung tanglad. Tapos nung naamoy niya, sabi niya, ay, ang bango-bango, no? Ano bang gamit nito? Sabi ko, pwedeng gawing juice na ano. He said, ay, sige, business natin. Sabi ko, naunahan ka na. Yung tinatawag na lemongrass tea is actually tanglad tea. No? He was so excited. He's only 23, and he has no exposure. He comes from one of the other lesser schools, but also they're listed in the top rankings as well. So I said, what does your school teach you? And then I said, teka, baka UP students din natin mismo wala ring alam sa mga ano. And I'm just mentioning this because let's make nationalism something that must be pervasive. Talk about intersectionality. Nationalism is knowing what our literature is. Nationalism is knowing what our flora and fauna is. Nationalism is knowing what our languages are. Why are our students taking Italian but cannot speak any other Philippine languages? At least learn one language other than your own.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sir Mike. Sir Jimmy, yep, go ahead po.
And then me.
Yeah, and then Sir Butch. So, Sir Jimmy, you can... Hindi, sir. Nakamute po kayo.
I-unmute mo na.
Unmute, sir. Unmute.
Lagyan mo ng tape.
Sir, pindutin niyo po ulit yung...
Unmute
yan.
na.
Okay, yan. Okay na kayo, sir.
Okay. Nationalismo. Nationalismo, no? Ang topic natin. Okay. You look up the word nation, country, no? They're all abstract, no? Nation, country. If you look up country, it will say something like where you are born, no? Nation is abstract. Words are abstract, no? So nationalism, abstract. So what does it boil down to pag sinabi mong nationalismo? You know, for me, if you say nation, what you mean is national community. That is nation. National community. Now, what does that mean? No, all it means is consciousness. No, the consciousness of a community. So, what is that consciousness? What is that consciousness? That is nationalismo. That consciousness, that community's consciousness. You know what that is? It is awareness sense of consciousness of how a community or what a community thinks and feels about their reality. That is nationalismo. Yan ang ibig sabihin ng nationalismo. A community consciousness of their own way of thinking and feeling about their reality. That's national consciousness. How is that? How does that grow? How does that develop? Through education. If I were President Duterte, which I am not, no, the first priority of government should be education. Education is education of human consciousness. That's what it is. No? So nationalismo is communities' consciousness of their own culture, their own way of thinking and feeling about their own reality, which culture, that is culture, and that is always evolving through time. It changes. No culture is permanent. It always changes, like all languages, which is the embodiment of consciousness, of human consciousness, also evolves. So culture also evolves. No? That's national consciousness. Okay? Yeah. Consciousness talaga, kaibigan.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Sir Jimmy.
Oh.
Sir Butch, go ahead po.
Oo, para sa akin naman, etong pagpapalaganap ng nasyonalismo o para sa akin yung mga karanasan, katangian at kamalayan natin bilang Pilipino, paano ipapasok yan sa GE? Nasa perspektiba na ginagamit natin yan sa pagtuturo ng mga specific subjects natin yan eh. At sinisikap ko naman kahit nagtuturo ako ng English ay mapasok pa rin yan. Halimbawa, pag nagtuturo ako ng American literature sa aking mga estudyante, ang una-una ko sinasabi sa simula pa lang ng semestre ay we are not taking this course to become Americans but to become better Filipinos. At pag pinag-aaralan namin ang mga kwento at ang psikolohiya ng mga karakter doon sa sitwasyong Amerikano, relate namin lagi ito sa aming bilang Pilipino. Bakit ganyan sila mag-isip? Ano yung mahalaga sa kanila? Kung tayo ba nasa ganyang sitwasyon, anong gagawin natin? So there's always this contextualizing of a foreign experience in Filipino terms, so we understand in which ways we are similar and which ways we are different from them, and what accounts for that difference, so that even other kinds of cultures can be appreciated in our terms, and in the process clarify who and what we are.
Thank you so much, Sir Butch, for those insights. Sir Fidel, you want to add something?
Yes, Ranji, I entered UP during the repressive years of martial law, and I think I learned my nationalism from my GE classes, and of course the corridors of Palma Hall. During my first sem, it was an English class taught by an American teacher, Dolores Feria, who was a martial law detainee. Books she asked us to read was Pedagogy of the Oppressed, this book by Neil Postman, I think that was teaching us a subversive activity, and Carlos Bolosan. Of course, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, it gave us forced us to look at injustice and suffering. And dito diniscuss ni Freire yung di ba yung banking concept of education, no? Parang nabulabog ako doon nabulabog ako sa idea na yung education pala usually ay parang binabahagi lang ng mga teachers ang kanilang kaalaman sa mga students, so para tayong mga empty receptacles tinalagyan ng kaalaman, no? Pero ang sabi dito ito freshman, my first year class, first sem, no? Sabi niya, but education should be liberative. No? It gives you new perspectives, no? Helps you develop the courage to look at things and question assumptions. No? Ang napakalaking impact sa akin nung freshman class ko na yun. That's a GE course. I learned nationalism. I learned to look at injustices as part of the human condition and ways with which we fight against injustice. It was also in the GE classes that I learned that there are many ways, there are many nationalisms. No? Ang nationalism sa atin importante. No? Dahil sa nationalismo, pinaglalaban natin ang karapatan, ang kalayaan, ang demokrasya. No? Pero sa ibang bansa, masama palang salita ang nationalismo. No? In countries like Japan and Germany, nationalism have actually pushed these countries into war. It's pushed these countries to colonize other countries. No? Anyway, ang gusto ko sabihin is that one thing I learned in GE is that these concepts do not have boxed meanings. No? In GE, we developed the humility to realize that no one group has the monopoly of correct ideas, including monopoly of love of country. Nationalism will have many meanings, it will have many manifestations, and there will be many ways of expressing that nationalism, many ways of expressing our activism. What is important is that to build in us the capacity to build bridges, to listen to each other, to build shared understandings. These are lessons beyond nationalism that I learned in GE, but definitely my GE training when I was a student made me an activist, and I hope it still makes UP students and activists. But gaya ng nasabi ko, there are many ways of being an activist. You can be in the streets, but you can be a teacher, you can be a doctor, you can be an engineer, you can be an activist lawyer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that. All right, so ang sarap po ng kwentuhan natin, kahit sa chat box, ang sarap din po ng kwentuhan. So time flies pag masarap ang kwentuhan. So allow me po to just ask maybe one more question this time related to a general question on who should teach GE. So may 3 questions po tayo dito. Na baka pwedeng sumagot ang ating panelists. Can instructors teach GE? Are they allowed to? How can we encourage faculty to teach GE when some are afraid of teaching such courses when some topics are not within their specialty field of discipline? And how can we encourage the senior faculty to teach the intro GE courses to give a solid foundation to the students? And somewhat related to teaching, can we set up a system of team teaching with GE faculty from different CUs so that we can also get the different regional perspectives, to which I think yes to the team teaching. No? So yun po yung maybe our last question before we go to the synthesis on who should teach GE. Sir Butch? O Sir Jimmy? You want to say something, Sir Jimmy?
Sila muna.
Sir Butch, kayo daw po muna.
Sige, para sa akin naman, kahit sino, maaaring magturo ng GE basta meron siyang mahusay na orientasyon kung ano ang GE, bakit natin tinuturo ito bilang GE. So para sa akin, the GE designation is on top of whatever else the course description is. But on top of that, there are certain objectives that we want to meet. And this is, for example, like to encourage critical thinking and to, instill some kind of Filipino consciousness in the student. And as long as the instructor understands that, then he or she should be able to find a way of hitting these objectives above the technical aspects of the course. Of course, ideally, senior professors should also teach GE, or at least some undergraduate course. In my 35 years of teaching in UP, I always insisted that I teach an undergraduate course pag nagtuturo ako. Ano? But GE is, well, I don't want to scare young people naman from teaching GE because tayo naman, pinagdaanan natin yan, and we learned a lot. GE is also a learning process for the instructor. Let's remember that. We are also forming the instructors, the young instructors who are teaching GE, so that they imbibe it until they become senior professors and it gets into their blood. Eh kung hindi mo isusuong yan ng maaga pa, ay hindi matututo yan. It's not something that suddenly will occur to you when you're 45 or 50.
Thank you, Sir Butch. Anyone else would like to add to that? Sir Mike, yes po, go ahead.
I think the pandemic offers us a chance again. There's an opportunity because we required people to do course packs, and forced to good yan. No, many of us did not really systematically prepare materials that could be passed on. I mean, I had GE courses from way back. In fact, I instituted two GE courses in Antro, and very early, I already had workshops because it was interdepartmental to train other people. No? But we did not produce written materials or teaching materials. I see that as a need. Perhaps UP should offer mini grants for departments to do this mentoring, no, passing it on. Meaning the course packs should of course be developed through actual teaching of the course, and then kung komportable na yung tao, then they can share that. No? And it is a reminder to, I mean, who would have known? No? I'm turning 70 next year, no? And I'm feeling guilty about not having passed on with other courses. GE, I can feel proud and say, pinasa ko yan. No? But there are still courses that they make me teach. No? Even as Chancellor, did you know I was handling 6 to 12 units to SEM? No? Things like anthropological theory, research methods. No? And the department, I know that maybe the solution is I'll simply say I am not going to teach it anymore. But that's also unfair because they say you don't have the materials there. So I think the course packs will be a step forward. And if UP can give support, maybe even the American Anthropology Association has this online textbook program. I think we can learn from it. No? Na maybe UP Press should go online na no? Yung people can handle the desktop publishing, post it there. You can revise it every year, no? And they're very. I'll send you the links, no, for OVP for OVPAA to look at, and also for our own OBCAA as possible models. No? They're very well done, and they can be revised every year.
Okay, thank you, Sir Mike.
Yes, daw. UP Press will go online. Yes, daw.
Oh, yes to the suggestion. At saka andyan si Ma'am Sige para sa UP Press. So I guess with that, I'm very sorry, but you know, yun nga, sarap ng kwentuhan natin. I think we've covered the most of the questions that we've received from the registration and also during the event. So we'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their insights and reflections on these questions, and also our participants for also sharing and joining the conversation through the chat. So now I turn it over to Ma'am Sige again for the synthesis of the session. Ma'am Sige?
Before I do a synthesis and I say and not the, Butch reminded me of the Knowledge Festival, which we were planning to hold in July last year, back to back with the Faculty Conference on Teaching and Learning, as preparation for the disruptive future, which was at that time abstract because we already knew the changing landscapes and the changing landscape of higher education, that we really had to do that. But the disruptive future fell on us and COVID was there. So we will still have the Knowledge Festival. Well, whether it will be next semester or early January is something that will still be said. Okay. Liberal education is the hallmark of college education. A legacy of the Enlightenment, it is the ideal aspiration of higher education institutions worldwide. Colleges and universities are expected to provide students a holistic education that prepares them to live meaningful lives and contribute significantly to the transformation of their communities. As disciplinal, and this was something that Mike mentioned earlier, as disciplinal specializations evolved and universities increasingly aspired and focused on becoming research universities, the general education program was the means. It was what carried out the objective of college education and is its embodiment, the embodiment of liberal education. Amidst changes in the global and national landscape, UP has struggled and continues to struggle to ensure that the GE program remains faithful to the liberal, holistic, and integrative orientation of the universities as articulated in the latest GE framework, developing not only measurable skills or competences, but equally important, the capacity for and capabilities in critical and creative thinking and transformative action, promoting the loftiest principles at the core. I'm just quoting from that framework. At the core of a UP education, beyond inculcating habits of thought and ways of perceiving, to developing the ideals of pagiging makatao, and here is where the empathy that Fidel was raising earlier, at pagiging makabayan, which was the question earlier about nationalism. UP's GE program, as well as that of its counterpart universities abroad, consists of a variety of courses. On one hand, we have courses in basic education, such as fundamentals of writing, critical thinking, mathematics, and courses related to civic responsibility. And on the other hand, courses that conflate with interdisciplinary education that cut across disciplines. But regardless of course content, and as an aside, the pandemic made us realize that the content we pack into our courses do not necessarily translate to learning, apart from the elements of transactional distance that Dean Pat actually expounded upon in her recap. Regardless of course content, the GE program imparts habits of mind, what Fidel calls mindsets, that are necessary to cope with the challenges of a fast-changing world, and a world, if Mike's discussion earlier is the future, a world that we will have a lot of pandemics. So what is it? The ability to read critically, to read between the lines, to recognize how rhetoric and argument are deployed, the ability to generalize from one course topic to the next, to write fluently, to imagine and write, think and imagine, as Jimmy would say, to write fluently and critically, to master a body of material, to communicate logically about a common body of evidence and common rules of inference orally and in writing, to link scientific or humanistic materials that are disparate, the ability to develop a critical, to connect dots and construct a big picture that reflects the intersection, for instance, of biography, scientific developments, history, social structure, the ability to reflect on underlying assumptions. Sometimes just being able to connect the dots alleviates anxiety at a time of crisis, because one is able to stand under the context, as Jimmy would say, stand under the context, try to understand even the illiberal situation we are in, and also try to understand how we can solve the problem we're in. This morning's panel gave us snapshots. They're just snapshots of the breadth and depth of the GE minds of our esteemed panelists, as well as many tips that we can carry throughout life. Jimmy Abad reflected philosophically on the activity of writing, its intimate link to language and imagination, how consciousness translates into language. Since he says that since every intellectual pursuit needs a language and every intellectual field has its own language, then this has implications for another conversation about the interaction of disciplines that will ferry each discipline's reality in the void. Hopefully the void is not a big gap. So their imaginations interact, and in the course of this interaction, develop an interdisciplinary culture. Butch Dalisay went beyond the usual formulations of GE to share 12 overarching realizations that students should learn for life. Insights that have universal value because of their applicability to different contexts, and most especially in this time of pandemic and the future where you will have disruptions. He further elaborated on the pandemic as a context, as the context for us to reflect on life, particularly the science of life, and the need for rationality in the highly politicized context we are in. And the need for rationality actually underlies the discussions also of Mike and Fidel. Apart from walking us through the history of UP's GE, expounding on the value of GE in these illiberal times that Butch and Fidel alluded to, the post-truth politics that rely on assertions that feel true, on conspiratorial thoughts. I didn't realize, Mike, that the conspiratorial thinking in the US is also with us, or absurd claims of fabricated facts systematically and persistently used to misinform. So the critical spirit of that GE nurtures is what unsettles, and this is something I took from Mike, unsettles the illiberal forces and renders critical thought as radical because it has radical implications for what is. Fidel underscored the idea of science and math as adventures of the mind and as a way of thinking of learning beyond science and math as an adventure, of math as important for human flourishing, which was the topic of a very, very interesting lecture throughout these GE conversations, is a mindset, just as a narrow mindset is also a mindset. But I guess it is really how we actually live this change mindsets, evolve towards mindsets that are closer, that you more closely to the GE principles is there. The Q&A dealt with interdisciplinary activities that we need to have serious conversations for. I think there are many suggestions. Butch addition of collaboration or working with others, which is now a value for the future. A future graduate of any university must be able to collaborate with each other. So he added that in addition to empathy. We are now beginning the transition to the next normal or to a future of disruptions. As we have stressed time and again, and I think you're sick of this by now, the future will not be face-to-face. It will be a mix of face-to-face, virtual, and experiential. So we are now being practiced for that future. This GE conference is very rich in insights and also leads us closer to crafting the future because GE is the program we can more freely experiment on regarding what is taught, how it is taught, how to assess, how to even grade. Should we do away with grades? I mean, there's a lot of discussion now among higher education institutions in terms of grades and in terms of honors, and maybe a very different way of looking at grades, where will it just be pass or fail? But anyway, this is too early to discuss that. How to collaborate. I guess Butch raised it earlier. We are not very collaborative in UP, even if we collaborate in the sciences. I guess there is wisdom in the crowd, and one brilliant person is not equal to the wisdom of a crowd. But also, team teaching, collaborating with each other is practical for us if we do it. If we have like-minded people who come together, divide the work among themselves, this is a way of lightening our load in a time of pandemic. Even as administration rethinks the loading, di ba? Ang problema lang ng team teaching, divide ang load. But anyway, the future of higher education is a future where breadth and depth matter. We were in a meeting 2 weeks ago. I think Banji, Tess, Payungay, and I were asked by the president to join him in a meeting of the ASEAN universities, of the AUN ASEAN University presidents. And in that meeting, there was a whole discussion about what the other universities are doing. And interestingly, it's now increasing, enhancing breadth, and the depth of the disciplines is still there, but a little reduction there. NUS, for instance, is increasing GE. They don't call it GE, so I like Mike's suggestion about liberal arts rather than calling it general education. But they're also setting up a virtual liberal arts college. It's virtual. You still have the faculties of science, but there's a virtual college where the faculty align with that virtual college. But that is because of the premise and because of the reality that GE, that soft skills associated with GE, integrative skills, the capacity to connect dots are very vital for people to be able to cope and be mentally fit in a world that is constantly changing. So this synthesis does not do justice to the breadth and depth of the discussions we've had in the panel. It certainly does not do justice to the GE conversations that we listened to. So I ask every one of you, if you have time, to please listen to the conversations because they help with enhancing the GE spirit. The spirit is what we need to actually imbibe. The GE conversations will continue because you have begun to craft the GE of the future. So this is not the end. A GE that meets its objectives, including building a collaborative culture in search of solutions to the many problems plaguing the nation, is what we really need. In this time of COVID, we are tapping into the values, ways of thinking and doing that we inculcate in GE and that we have to be more mindful of in terms of inculcating them. So we thank our panelists for sharing experiences and thoughts produced by playful and creative minds. We also thank all the those who actually contributed to the chat, and the GE and the organizing group will actually make all of these available to you. So thank you very much, and back to you, Vanji.
Thank you, Ma'am Sinj. At this point, we'd like to present the certificate of appreciation to our panelists, starting with, of course, Ma'am Sinj, starting with Ma'am Dr. Patricia Arinto for imparting her invaluable knowledge as a resource person, providing the synthesis of part 1 of the System GE Conference 2021 on GE Conversations during the Plenary Conversations 1 of the UP System GE Conference 2021 with the theme General Education in and the Next Normal, given this 11th day of May 2021, signed Vice President for Academic Affairs, Maria Cynthia Rose Banson Bautista. We also thank VP Sage for moderating the session on Plenary 1, and of course, our esteemed panelists, Dr. Professor Emeritus Jose Delisay Jr., Professor Emeritus Michael Tan, Professor Fidel Namenzo, University Professor Emeritus Hemino Abad. So thank you very much, everyone. Please stay on for the photo op, and I'd like to invite you to the concluding session, Plenary 2 Conversation this afternoon at 1 o'clock. And then I'd also like to thank this opportunity to thank our secretariat, support staff, sina Steph, Kai, and Cars, pati sina Dax and Rika, who took care of the Q&A, collating the Q&A. And of course, the TWG on GE implementation, we have here si AVP Alisa Alampay, si Ma'am Leia Abayaw of UP Baguio, Ma'am Nera Catalbas of UP Visayas, Sir Mo Liangco of UPLB, Ma'am Nak Gabriel of UP Diliman, Ma'am Nelfa Glova of UP Mindanao, Sir Shane Carion of UP Cebu, and Ma'am Pat Arinto, who's a member at large of the technical working group. So thank you, everyone. So we go to the photo ops now. So we'd like to request everyone to turn on their videos if they can, please. And Steph will be the one to take the pictures. Steph, parang
Yes.
ilang page tayo. So this is the itong pinakamaraming GE conversation na nag-attend po. I think we reached 295. Go ahead, Steph.
Okay po. 1, 2, 3. 10 more.
Na-mute yata si Steph.
Nasa page 6 na siguro siya, ma'am.
Last stage.
Okay.
Last na.
Okay po. Thank you.
Maraming salamat po. Thank you very
Everyone,
much.
see you this
Ingat po.
afternoon.
Thank you. See you this afternoon.